We are all creating a digital legacy. Did you ever wonder what will happen when we die? Will your loved ones recreate you? How do you tell your story so they get the right version of you? Or will AI let you tell your story yourself? Did you ever think about digital death?
Is that kind of like the death of your digital presence?
No, but think about it. At some point, we're all going to cease to exist as a living entity. But during our time, we actually create this digital presence, this digital version of ourselves, where everyone's recording everything. We create tons of videos, of ourselves. We're adding photos. I mean, there are billions of videos and photos being uploaded and posts being created every day. We're creating text, things that represent us. And what happens to that after we cease to exist? It becomes almost like a memorial.
So it's kind of like being remembered in the digital realm.
Right, like a digital tombstone almost.
Right. So before all this tech stuff that we have to remember us, well, how are we remembering people that died before?
So historically speaking, most of a person's life was tied to the church. Prior to the 18th century, there was you have the Puritans, you have the very religious sects that were tied to the churches. So when you died, you were buried in what was called a churchyard, and basically the tombstones or the headstones were controlled by the church. So there was very little description of the deceased. In most cases, it was either just a name and a birth date and a death date. In some cases, it only had something like infant or son of William or something like that. Very, very little descriptions were prevalent in prior to the 18th century, because again, it wasn't about you as the person, it was about the church and then, where you're going after life. So there wasn't a lot of ornate or ornamental tombstones or gravestones at that point. In the early 18th century in the United States, we have a movement really led by the Great Awakening, where people started to kind of separate a little bit their afterlife and stuff. They started to separate from the church and those religious beliefs a little bit, to the point where we now have rural cemeteries that aren't connected to a church, but it was more community cemeteries. And so then you really start to see more elaborate tombstones and headstones, more a description of the deceased. This was so-and-so, and he was the father and brother of, and husband of. And so you have that movement again toward a more descriptive of the deceased, a more description of the person lying underneath that stone. And then further on after that, then you really start to see those more ornate angels and relics, if you will, of the person to again describe more of them. And so that was really the movement past that. And so after, in the early 1900s, then you really start to see again a more ornate statues, angelic figures, and then moving into the 1990s and 2000s, then you start to see again either further descriptions where we're actually incorporating inscriptions or poems, pictures of the deceased. In some cases, you can go up to a tombstone and actually see the person either engraved or a photograph that's been put on that tombstone directly. And so that's really the progression in a very general term of moving from very something that's very simplistic when it was church oriented, more into what we see today, where it's you have a lot of descriptions of the deceased. Even today, there's companies that you can actually have QR codes made and put on your tombstone, where somebody can walk up in a cemetery, a very traditional walk through a cemetery, but yet if you have a smartphone, you can scan that QR code and learn everything about that person who's laying there. So you're moving from just William, the father of, the husband of, and now you get their complete life on a website that's connected to that QR code.
So that's pretty cool that you could actually go up to a tombstone and scan a QR code and bring up everything about someone that's died. Now, in my mind, I think that gives someone an opportunity to show to the world the person that they want people to think that they were when they were alive, right? You kind of get to fudge it.
Yeah, well, I mean, but the reality is, are they creating a true picture of themselves, or to your point, are they creating just the picture they want people to see? Right? I don't think anyone ever put on a tombstone like, "Here lies John, he was an a-hole." Do you know what I mean? Like, so
We
everyone is
really
putting that.
should. We really should start that.
Right. So everyone's putting that good foot forward, but how do you sort of create a story, or throughout your life create content that actually creates a true version of who you are, good, bad, or indifferent?
Well, I think we need to think about also our time on Earth before we die and this digital existence is out there, because what we're putting out there is going to stay, to your point, there forever. So it's going to go beyond what we wanted people to see or think who we are. Like sometimes we go to social media and we just do things. We don't really think about the ramifications or what message that's sending, So we really need to be conscious of what we want people to see.
Right. So the question really becomes, how do you tell your story over the course of your lifetime?
In a way that's going to take you through into the next life with people really seeing, the real you.
Right. Think about it. If you could know like so much of like who, say, your great grandfather or great grandmother was in their own words.
Right.
And how do you tell that story? I think that's what we need to know.
In terms of telling your story throughout your life, I think the most important thing to really focus on is, who do you want to be? Who are you really in this world? And what do you want to portray to others? And what do you really want to portray to yourself? And really, we are all brands. Every single one of us is a brand in our own right. And I always like to suggest people do like a social media inventory and go through, pretend that you're not you, and go through your Facebook, your Instagram. It probably shows my age that I started with Facebook. All of your different Snapchat, whatever else is out there. Go through those and figure out, if you didn't know you, what would your social media feeds be saying about you and about the kind of life that you're living? So trust in the fact that you are unique, and what comes out of your head, your mouth, your fingertips, whatever it may be, is going to be unique to you. So you can tell your story. You don't have to plot it out over a lifetime. It's going to change. There's going to be ups and downs, and that really is part of the story. But just kind of think about who you want to be and that voice and that energy that you want to put out. And it'll guide your decisions when you are writing.
So isn't really your digital footprint your digital tombstone in the future?
Yeah. I mean, I thankfully, I'm old enough to say that most of the really stupid stuff I did was before everything was broadcast on the internet. And I think now that is something that people have to be very careful with, whether you are posting it yourself or whether people around you are posting. I think in addition to what we put online, we do have to live and actually create our story in an authentic way, because social media is going to catch us. That digital footprint is going to it's going to get us, whether we put it out there or someone else does. So not only should you be thinking about, who you want to portray on social media, but who do you really want to be in real life? Be that authentic person, and you're much less likely to get caught doing something and, captured on social media for life.
Obviously privacy, is a big concern in this day and age, where we have all of these tech corporations kind of looking into what we're doing. And so my question is how this relates to death and your online presence. What happens now? I die. What happens to everything that I've put out there? I'm thinking about someone that, passed away last year, that we both know. And I just saw something this morning, a post about him, his daughter posted, and it came up on my feed, and, he's still staying alive, But like, who owns that?
I mean, it is interesting because on some social media sites, you're actually giving away your rights of your images, right? So not all of them, but on some of them, you do give away that rights. But the reality is that a possession, like a home or a car or even other things you may own, where you're leaving it to whoever inherits from you, right? Your children, your spouse. So that really becomes a question. Does the social media company that you uploaded it to, if you sign off on it, own it, or does your surviving, children or whatever the case is?
I just think I could go in and start posting as someone. Imagine nobody knows, my mother dies, and then I go on her Facebook and I can keep going. She left it to me in the will, and I can keep her alive.
Yeah, I mean that's where it gets interesting, right? So, and that's where you can start taking this step further.
The ethical issues come in when we're not replicating a public figure. We can have Benjamin Franklin, or whoever talking to us, and that's perfectly fine. But I also think there should be a clause now in wills and testament to opt out of this opportunity, because that's an ethical issue if you have some private citizen who is being replicated. And there's issues where if nobody knows he's dead yet, that they could, steal his identity for a while, his or hers. So yeah, there's a lot of ethical questions when it comes to private citizens, and we need to consider that.
Nobody wants to think that once they die, they're going to be forgotten or that their memory is just going to be erased entirely. I mean, that's kind of a sad thought when you think about it. But now that your loved ones can go back and see you and hear you and get that representation of you.
So does that really mean when you're creating this digital essence, you could basically live on forever, right? People are always able to visit that and you're living on forever. But what's crazy is with AI out there, people are actually starting to replicate digital versions of people, right? We saw this happen with the AI that spoke just like Joe Rogan.
Hey, Joe Rogan, it's me, Joe Rogan. Please come save me, man. These artificial intelligence guys have trapped me in a machine.
The pieces of software that animate photos. And there's things like Replika that actually could take people's text and emails and actually create digital responses just as those people did when they were alive.
Well, there's actually an app called Replika. And it is doing exactly what you were talking about in that it was actually created by a woman who lost her partner to a fatal accident. He was hit by a car, and so they were doing chatbots and all kinds of other things, and she plugged in all of the texts and emails and things that she had gotten from him and into an AI, and it was able to really replicate him, which is why it's called Replika. It replicated him and became a companion because it would respond to her in his voice, in the kinds of inflections and things that he would say. And it was very helpful for her. It's very therapeutic. And then it became this app. And what this app does is it learns you. It through a series of conversations and up and down voting, it becomes to know who you are, and it becomes a real companion.
I think it's really cool that we could eventually get to a place where I could sit with my mother after she passes away and feel like I have her, and maybe she's even communicating with me. And, I know that that's what this app is working on in a different sense, but like my question then is, how do I interact? I'm the living person. It's not my mother, right? I know it's not my mother. Now, how am I supposed to interact with this pseudo mom? And what am I supposed to, do I still get mad at her? Do I still, do I get mad at the stuff the AI came up with? And, do I still tell her things in the same way, knowing, because at the bottom of my heart, I know that this is not really her.
An AI that learns you so well and can be a companion and doesn't come with a lot of the biochemical tethers that humans do and our fear-based instincts that we've evolved over millennia and all our genetic memory. It doesn't have that. And so it's kind of even a better companion in some cases than a human being that you don't know what their motives are. You don't know if they like you for you.
But what about when your mother's angry with you, right? If it's interacting with your mother, right? Not all relationships are perfect. So what about if it's a disagreement? Like you don't like what your AI mom has to say, and you're gonna disagree with each other, right? Are you gonna have arguments? Is the AI going to start have a consciousness where it may be argumentative, just like a parent may be, or it's going to be overly nurturing?
Mm-hmm.
And I personally believe that it's not that consciousness is the gold here, not these biochemical, algorithms that we carried around in. And so the real question, I think, gets down to whether self-awareness or consciousness, individualized point of consciousness, emerges from a complex system like a human brain or a computer, or if it reaches a certain amount of complexity where it can host consciousness. And so that's where the big question is. First of all, what is consciousness? And I think consciousness is different than our individual minds. I think consciousness is the substrate of everything. And so the fact that we are building an AI and getting it to the point where it can host its own self-consciousness, that will allow consciousness in general to enjoy this 3D density longer, and probably with less resource, waste, and all of these things that we human beings do.
Did you ever see that show Upload on Amazon Prime?
No.
Well, it's really interesting. Basically, it's sort of this concept we're talking about. Someone passes away, but they're actually uploading that person digitally into this app that basically that person lives in and you could interact with. But the crazy part about that is the person has more, the person that's uploaded actually has some freedom. And depending on who's funding them, they could have different things in the app, no different than if you're playing a video game and you have more gold coins, you could buy a cool outfit or live in a nicer place. And it's the same sort of concept of what we're talking about here. So, my question always is, are writers sometimes, predicting the future, or is technology creating it and writers sort of writing about it?
This reminds me of something that I was reading from George Dyson, and he was really looking into the future. He's got these pretty crazy, like you're saying, about authors and, kind of predicting the future. And he had these thoughts about what happens when humans and machines come together. And he talks about how it kind of returns you to, a belief in something greater, right? So he says, a world where humans coexist with technologies they no longer control or fully understand. This is where the human mind took form. We grew up as a species surrounded by mind and intelligence everywhere we looked. Since the dawn of technology, we were on speaking terms with our tools. Intelligence in the cloud is nothing new. So to me, what this says is that, it kind of reminds me of what we heard from Kristy, and it kind of brings it full circle for me. We took something, the beginning of Tombstones, which was, because of the church, really. I mean, it was the church's thing and this belief in something, in the afterlife. And we had to kind of put our faith and trust into something that was greater than us. And it's kind of come full circle, because the day that the AI becomes greater than us and really sides with nature again, and that's when we have to put our faith into something bigger than us again, because we no longer have control of it. Just like we don't have control of whatever, religious belief you believe in, or whatever, you believe in. It brings it full circle. We're right back there in having to believe in something bigger than us. So regardless of what you believe, ultimately this digital evolution is going to help us stay connected to our loved ones, which is really the most important part. And unfortunately for us who are still living and who have lost loved ones, we're not quite at that place where we can have a digital version of mom sitting next to us to argue with. But we do have a lot of digital technology that's helping us connect with those in the afterlife.
Well, we see, that a lot of people believe ghosts could actually connect through electronics, right? They use a lot of electronics to detect ghosts.
If I were a spirit And you know, again, we start with the concept that everybody is made up of energy, and energy cannot be created or destroyed. So my energy is going to be that spirit, right? If we're going on that theory. So my energy is going to be that spirit. And so when somebody's trying to contact me after I'm deceased, they're going to be dealing with my essence and my spirit. So I think if I see a digital representation of myself, it may allow me to connect more. But I think that it will still be that same connection that we're finding with spirits right now, right? We'll just have a different mechanism to communicate with that spirit.
So when we were talking to Kristy, she also mentioned a story about how a ghost actually basically came onto closed circuit television and was showing that they were murdered, right? She was telling us a story, which was pretty creepy, if you remember. And here's the thing, if ghosts can interact with electronics and communicate through electronics or interfere with electronics, I don't think it's that far off to say if there is an AI and the ghost is able to communicate with electronics and connect to that AI, that they may use that AI in order to connect with their loved ones in the future.
So are you thinking that Alexa will actually be my mom?
I think Alexa, your mom could take over Alexa is what I'm saying.
Nice. And for the record, I know we've been talking about my mom this whole episode, but she's still living, so she's not an Alexa yet.